Okay, welcome to a special episode of podcast about names and other stuff. I call this special because actually I'm going to tell you the person we're talking. We're going to be speaking with my friend Troy. And I'm telling you his name already, even though this is the first episode that you are hearing about him, because I messed up. It was a very low, depressing moment in my life after I sat down. I recorded my first episode with Troy. It was great. It was beautiful. I said it was like some of the best I've ever done in my life. And I went back to check the files, and I had 49 minutes of silence because I somehow failed to click the right button. And so we had to go back and re-record. And I realized, you can't do the same thing twice. We can't revisit what we've already done. And so instead, I have 2 episodes with Troy, and I'm breaking them up. They're not going to get them one after the other like everybody else in the series. But I'm using them as kind of like just break points, just segues into new people. And we don't focus explicitly on his names, but we will talk about the names that my friend Troy carries. And so today, this is a special episode. There'll be another one later on in the season where I sit down with my friend Troy. It's a little bit shorter, and we talk about him. We talk about his experiences. We talk about the things that make him the person he is. And yes, his names, because again, this is a podcast about names and other stuff. This is definitely, my time with Troy is definitely leans more towards the other stuff, but I think you're going to get an idea of his names too. He's an interesting individual. I'm so thankful to call him my friend, even though it might be a little bit of an insult to him to be friends with somebody like me. But hopefully, prayerfully, you will enjoy this little taste into the life of a man named Troy. So here you are. Okay, all right. So I pray to God that I am recording and actually gathering this because I've never had that problem before. So
God and I both pray for you because this is the last time.
Well,
just saying.
We got to get 2 episodes in, okay? Because everybody gets 2 episodes, and the first one doesn't count because it's not recorded. So it doesn't count because people can't listen to it, okay? And so I'm going to go ahead and call you Troy because people missed out on the wonderful one where we talked about Troy. What was your middle name again?
O'Neill.
Troy O'Neill Body and all the beautiful things about you. Like, hopefully some of those things will come out this time around, but I'm going to start entirely differently. I'm going to have an intro thing that's going to do the whole, blah, blah, blah. This is what we're talking about. This is what we're doing. And I've got this one right here. I got a quote I want to start with. Usually I end with a quote, but I want to start with a quote by James Baldwin. He says, "History is not in the past. It is in the present. We take it with us." How is your history with you today?
My personal history?
However you want to see that word. We're being very liberal here, and you get to define the word for yourself.
Oh, it's with me. And sometimes I wish it wasn't that I have to. I grew up in a very conservative, small mountain Appalachian town. The largest mountains in Kentucky are Black Mountain and Pine Mountain. Okay. And they converge in Harlan County, Kentucky, where I was born and raised. And that community, most of us in that community came for coal mining. So my grandfather came from Georgia to mine coal, and that's how my family got there. I learned a lot of things growing up there, good things, and you're very sheltered and protected by those mountains. But you got to remember, mountain ranges can keep bad things out, but they can keep good things out. And so that history of growing up in a small, very conservative town, sometimes I carry that with me. And a lot of times it served me well, but sometimes I have to step back and go, let that go. There's a world elsewhere.
So do you see yourself as an Appalachian?
Oh, absolutely.
Is that the way you pronounce it?
I am an Appalachian. I am a hillbilly, and I have no problem with that.
You are the only black hillbilly I know.
Then you don't know anyone. The Appalachian Range, defined by the federal government from the ARC, is the Appalachian Regional Commission. It goes way down south, I believe, to Alabama, and goes all the way up to Pennsylvania and maybe beyond. To me, that's a bit too liberal. I don't think of Alabamans or people in Pennsylvania as Appalachians. I'm not sure they think of themselves that way. But absolutely, there's a black community in those mountains. Indeed, in Kentucky, Frank Walker, who was our poet laureate, created Afro-Latins, which is a mix of African and Appalachian. Crystal Good out of West Virginia is a part of that group, and she's created a Appalachian newspaper out of West Virginia that focuses on Black current life. There is a movement. There is a podcast out there. There are various things going on. So sure, there are plenty of Black Appalachians.
Yeah, I've heard of that, and I've even actually heard of Black Hillbilly, but you're just the only one that I know. Like, I've actually I know of a kid who once told me that he was a redneck, a black kid. And I was like, how's that work? So I know a black redneck, and now I know a Black hillbilly.
Oh, sure.
I'm
I am.
diversifying.
I am a hillbilly, and I'm cool with that.
So what does that word mean to you? What does hillbilly mean to you?
I mean, it breaks all the stereotypes. There are stereotypes of us that are from those mountains, and quite frankly, let's be honest. There's always some truth in stereotypes. I don't care who you are and what the stereotype is, and there are certain things about Appalachia that I wish I could change. But then there are certain things about Appalachia that I would never change. I did a master's degree in political science, and one of the things you'd study when we would study and discuss inner cities, and they would talk about, well, because of the level of poverty, you have this intense crime. And every time a professor or someone in journalism would say that, I always thought, yet you have West Virginia, which is 100% in the Appalachian Region Commission. That's important because there is no other state of the 14 states that's 100%. Kentucky, only Eastern Kentucky's in it. Western Kentucky, Central Kentucky are not. West Virginia is 100% in Appalachia. It is called the Mountain State. And last I checked on those statistics, it had the second lowest crime rate in the United States of America and one of the highest poverty levels. Wow. Those two variables don't co-vary. You cannot just say, well, they commit crime because they're poor.
Yeah, I did not know that. That is...
Lots of people are poor in Appalachia. And for as a region, if you count us as a region, we probably have the lowest crime rate in the country. So how do you always run to those statistics? There's a lot of positive things about those mountains. And then, of course, there's negatives. And having the vision to diversify our economy and certain things off the land. But it's difficult when you're surrounded by mountains to figure out how to live beyond them.
Yeah.
That's what the beauty of technology is. It's the same as when you go to a culture that is island, not a beach culture. I'm not talking Miami on the edge of the water. I'm talking an island. Those people have to live off that island and live off the water. There's just nothing else. You can say, well, maybe we should do a ski resort here in the Seychelles. But I like your bold vision, but that's never going to happen.
Yeah.
And we've learned to live off those mountains. Now we have to learn to live another way.
Live with the mountains, maybe.
You got to work with them.
Yeah.
I mean, they're not going away.
Yeah. So do you think, all right, let's say I showed up in Appalachia in one of my typical outfits like I am. Do you think that I would be able to fit in hillbilly Appalachia, even Afralachia world, or would it be like, no, man, you get back to California?
I think it's naive. The question, and I don't mean that too harsh.
No,
I think it's a naive question. What do you think you've got going on that we haven't seen before?
Well, that's exactly why I want to ask that.
I have a friend, and her name is Cindy. She went to law school, and we went to University of Kentucky together. And she is a white female. She moved back to Harlan County, where I grew up, when we were in high school, from the D.C. area. We went off to UK, University of Kentucky together, and she started dating a black guy. He's now an attorney in Louisville. His name is Alex. She invited Alex to go back to the mountains, to our home. And he was just going on and on while we were at UK. Oh, no, I'm not going to go down there. Oh, my God, this and that. And I remember asking him on campus one day, you think you and Cindy have invented something we've not seen before?
Yeah.
You think you're the first black and white couple that ever hit the mountains of Eastern Kentucky? I mean, just naive.
Yeah.
I mean, we went to school. We had proms. We saw black and white couples. We had mixed race kids in school. Just the naivete of what he said.
Yeah.
And when we started talking about racism and the N-word, I told him then, and I'll stand by it 100%, you're more likely to get called the N-word in Lexington, Kentucky than in Harlan County. And I'll stand by that. And I'm not going to say there are not people in Harlan who don't think it, but to actually say it, there's a certain level of rudeness that would contain them. And I told him, I said, it's just naive. So he did actually go down there, and when we got back, we were talking about that, and it was nothing like he expected.
Yeah. Well, that's why I asked that. So when Laura and I got to Kentucky, we had all these conceptions, because I mean, yeah, I may have lived in different parts of the country, but Kentucky, Appalachia, the idea of hillbillies, as it were, this stereotype of you all, I will say, since you identify as a hillbilly, the stereotype that you all have, especially out west in places like California, is such that it is not at all the reality. And so when we get here, one of the first things that shocked us was the sheer number of mixed race couples. Like we saw more on an average day in Kentucky than we ever saw in Southern California.
And so I'm going to let the journalism school in me come out. You're doing inside radio. You're assuming your listeners know who is Laura.
Oh, well, they know it's my wife.
How do they know?
Because nobody listens to my mess unless they actually know me.
So you never assume. But no, I mean, you're not going to come to Kentucky and show us anything new.
Yeah. That's something that I've enjoyed about Kentucky, actually, that I think bears amplifying. So many people outside of here have this view of Kentucky and don't understand just how complex and real it actually is. And I mean, people like you have traveled, you have seen the world. You are very much so an informed individual. And Kentucky is your home. But that's not necessarily like a slight against you, and not in a sense to say. I say that you look at me like what are you talking about? I'm like, because people would. I know people who were like that, like, oh, Kentucky's. They even look at my wife and I and say, how are you guys happy there? How are you guys able to call Kentucky home?
No, I've had it before when I worked in D.C. and when I worked abroad, particularly in D.C. I would get these snide remarks about being from Kentucky, and I remember when I lived in D.C. they got to a point where the city was at such a height of dysfunction. They had closed schools on Monday, and they're sitting there making jabs about Kentucky. And I said, well, at least our kids are in school today. And it's like, you really got to step back and look at I can make fun of any town, any state in America, in any country. That's the truth. Yeah. So it's what you choose to see.
Yeah. All right. This isn't a political question, but it is a name you carry, right? You are city administrator.
Mm-hmm.
What is that?
The city administrator position is the highest appointed position in city government here in Hopkinsville or in any city. So really, I mean, the job is real simple when you break it down in terms of I'm to implement the ordinances passed and the instructions passed by city council, and to realize to the best of my ability the vision of the mayor, the elected official of the day.
That sounds like that should be in a dictionary somewhere. Like you just like gave us a dictionary definition.
Because I think some people make it overly complicated. You're really there to implement what the council and the mayor wants. And that's the goal. You are not there. You can have ideas and visions of your own, but I have to sell them to the mayor and sell them to the council if I want to do something. I don't get to wake up and go, this is how we're going to live in this city today. Yeah. Remember, nobody has elected me to anything.
No.
The people did not go, we want Troy. And
I'd vote for you.
They voted for council members and they voted for the mayor, and I work for them.
Yeah, I'd vote for you.
So, well, thank you.
Yeah. All right, so city administrator, that's what you do. The way I summarize it, because I like to use like just street jargon almost with it, and I'd say he's the guy who runs the city, like, but he doesn't decide anything. Like,
they set the framework for me
to do, and he's the one who
they
actually
set the framework for. They pass a budget, and a budget in any city, any state, any country is a fingerprint. It's a blueprint. It's how the elected officials of that area have chosen to live. And have chosen for the government to operate in that framework. What are our priorities? If you look at our budget here in Hopkinsville, out of that $48 million, I mean, obviously the bulk of it is staffing, and that's in any organization, and the bulk of that is police and fire. Yeah. And I mean, that's really the basics of government. Government was created for the protection of people and their property. That's it. And everything else.
Protection of people and their property. That alliteration, you should be a preacher.
No, that's constitutional. That is what the basics of government are. Everything else, I don't want to dismiss it and say, well, it's just extra. But the priority is public safety.
Yeah.
And if you're not doing public safety, nothing else matters.
So with that in mind, how is your history informed, guide, impacts the way you work as a city administrator? Because your history, from hillbilly from Appalachia, black hillbilly from Appalachia, black hillbilly Afro-Latino. Okay, there you go. And then also you have your time in New Orleans, your time over in Sudan, right? Your time over in South Korea, your time in Lexington. You have all these places. I've heard stories of you hanging out in London. I'm like, that's a funny story. Like, you've been places. Your history is not just where you are now, but all the places you've been. How does that inform and affect how you work as a city
Well, I
administrator?
hope that I'm bringing to the mayor and to the council members a broader global view. When I was hired by then Mayor Carter Hendricks, that's what he was looking for, to bring those experiences from around the country and around the world, to distill them to that job. And sometimes that works and sometimes that doesn't. Every community is different, and you've got to have policies and ideas that are germane to that community. It does not matter in Hopkinsville, Kentucky, what they're doing in London. I mean, it just doesn't. When you're talking a city of, what are they, 8 or 9 million, and I can only imagine what their budget is in the billions and billions and billions of euros. We can't do every single thing they can do, but you can look and you can see what works. And a lot of people in my position tend to do that. What works somewhere else? And for me, I'm just being the contrarian. I like to look and see what didn't work, so that we don't repeat the mistakes of others. So there are opportunities in someone else's failure. That sounds horrible,
No,
but it is
that's just
literally the truth.
that just took me off guard because I was going to ask, but I'm going to ask a different question instead. I was going to ask, what have you seen in other places that work that you would like to see here? But since you're always working from the what doesn't work, I'm curious,
Perfect
like,
example. In New Orleans, there was created the Lot Next Door program. This is a program to get rid of all the vacant lots that city had. They had thousands before the storm, Hurricane Katrina. Then they had 90 something thousand after the storm. Something had to be done with those lots. So the people that came back to the city after the storm were living next to vacant lots, and the program was created. How do we get these lots into the hands of the people that live next door to them? Because 50% of the time they were taking care of them anyway. They would go cut them, they would go clean them, they would go, because New Orleans has a tropical climate, meaning the grass is growing on Christmas Day.
Yeah.
It's 70 something degrees and the grass needs cut. They had to figure out a plan. Well, the first 2 or 3 years of that plan, it was rocky. It's just, you're sitting there going, this is almost silly. And now you look at it 10 years later, it's been written up in the New York Times. It's gotten global media. The people who created it are elsewhere doing amazing things, but they had a rocky start. And looking at some of the mistakes they made, and it's not a criticism, the people that are down there running it now will tell you we had to learn. They were some of the first to ever do it. They had to learn the hard way. Well, now we have a lot next door in Hopkinsville.
Yeah, your first successful one's right
And
around the corner from me.
there you go. And we were able to look at, how did New Orleans fumble that ball? And let's try not to fumble it ourselves that way. And again, that's no criticism to New Orleans, but they stepped out there on faith. They were the first to do it, so they're going to make the first mistakes.
When we spoke last time, and I did not record it correctly, you shared some beautiful things about your time in South Korea, and how welcoming they were. How you never felt so much, on the outside. Like, there was people bringing you into their homes and just exposing you to their culture and just love of community, as it were. I didn't hear you say anything negative though. So what is something from South Korea that you would say, I'm gonna make sure we don't do that here?
I was in my early 20s. I wanted to see the world, and that was my jumping off spot, my landing spot. And yes, they were very warm to me. I was excited about their culture, fascinated about living in a country that had a history thousands of years old.
Yeah.
America's very young.
Yeah.
We have to remind ourselves that sometimes we see things going on in this country that we don't like, and you go, these are growing pains. In a country that is thousands of years old, and they're doing certain things the same way their great, keep going back. They welcomed me in their homes. They became fast friends. And to this day, we're still in touch. I loved a tremendous amount about that culture. But it wasn't my home.
Yeah.
But I loved everything, not everything. I loved most things about South Korea. Now, they were still in their development stage back then. I mean, they're a top 10 GDP right now.
And this was the 90s you were there before,
They
right?
were they're global power in that sense now, and you can see culturally, particularly in pop culture, they're just taking over the world
Yeah.
in a great way. And God bless them, more power to them. I'm happy for them. I got to see that firsthand, and now the rest of the world is getting it is able to see it too.
Yeah. But what's the thing that you saw there you're like, we shouldn't do that thing? Like that's a step too far, or was there just nothing like that you were exposed to?
No,
Nothing that you felt like,
no culture is perfect.
why no?
Yeah, that's a question I'm sitting there thinking. The way they approached academics is very, very rigorous, and I'm all for that. There were so many students, and maybe it's a completely different culture now, that didn't have the opportunities to pursue athletics and arts and so forth. It was, you know, this way or the highway, and it was a different culture at that time. So your best colleges there, if you could get into, say, the Harvard of Seoul, it would have been free. Your least academic colleges, and I'm trying to be polite there, cost a lot of money. So the emphasis and the onus is upon doing the best you can, get in the best colleges you can, or you're going to pay for it.
Yeah.
And so, it's not a culture of safety nets. You're gonna you're gonna thrive.
Yeah.
There's really no other opportunity to not thrive. So I got to see a lot of that, but I do believe a balanced life, having a little more freedom in terms of the arts and athletics and so forth for those young folks.
All right. And I know the arts are very important to you. I was telling my wife about the art thing you told me about in Louisville, and because I saw it in a different article where they're talking about like how they had the whole art walk going on up there.
The St. James Art Fair.
There we go. I don't know the technical names.
It
You know all the names.
is one of the largest art fairs in the country. Back in the day, it used to be about the third largest. It may still be. I don't know the stats on that. But it started, St. James Court is an area of what is called Old Louisville. If you've been to Louisville and you've been to Old Louisville, it is row after row after row of these massive Victorian homes. Probably one of the largest Victorian neighborhoods in America. And in the center of it, near the park, there's this giant fountain. And it's a beautiful fountain. And that little area right there is called St. James Court. And that started as a little art fair. And I believe the bulk of the money for the art fair was to fix the fountain.
Okay.
And then it grew, and then it grew, and then it grew, and it has become so large. They let school out. Art teachers and professors go for that. And when you're there and you see the thousands and thousands, it is a juried exhibition. So you just can't come set up a booth.
Yeah.
There's a committee that chooses you.
Yeah.
And it's just bigger and bigger, and they've added music and food, and it consumes really a whole side of the town. And people come from around the country, maybe around the world, to be a part of that. It was a thrill when I lived in Louisville to be able to attend that festival.
Now, when you lived in Louisville, but you said how you've never worked there. You've always you've only just lived there.
I moved to Louisville when I was working for Governor Fletcher in Frankfurt, but I didn't want to live in Frankfurt. So I would commute. And I kept my property in Louisville even when I was working in New Orleans. And when I moved overseas to work in Africa, I still had that condo there. And back to that St. James, it was just one of those things late September, early October that everybody prepared to go to. And it was a Friday, Saturday, and I do believe a Sunday morning thing. And the art ranges from any type of art you can think of. And you saw all walks of life, artists showing up from all around the world. And if you saw something, I cannot emphasize it enough, grab it. And I understand the tendency, especially if you've got a limited budget, where you go, I've got this much in my pocket. I want to see the whole expanse of this thing and then make my decision. It doesn't work that way. You're not going to see the expanse of the entire thing, not in one day. Nobody does. You would have to go by every single booth and just give them a 5-second look. And if you're like me, you're going to stop, talk to the artist, because it's really something to have art in your home. Art is extremely personal. And to have the art in your home and to have met the artist and get to know their story, that makes it even more personal. So I'd like to talk to them, and you get 25% of it done in a day. And You say, well, I'm going to come back the next day. You have to think that through. And then the third day, if you see something you really love at a festival like that, if it really speaks to you and move you, grab it.
Now, I've noticed of late that you are a little bit opinionated about this. So I want you to tell me, what is good art to you?
And again, it is very personal. Um, and you have those out there that say, well, no, all art is relative. And so you can't say there's good or bad. Yeah, you can. There's some bad art out there. I'm not going to sit there and play that game. And you got to try and you got to have some effort in there. You can't just, well, you can, I guess, in a participatory democracy, sit there and say, I can just take a blank sheet of paper and say, well, that's art. Okay. You go with that, but it's not for me. And all art is personal, and I don't think it's relative. I really don't. And you can see the masters at work who put some effort and skill in their craft. You know it when you see it. I will say this, there really isn't a definition of what art is. But I will tell you this, as a former commissioner of culture and history in the state of West Virginia, and I was over all the state's arts programs, I can't tell you what art is, but I can tell you what it's not. It doesn't tear down. It doesn't destroy. It doesn't hurt the culture. It doesn't ruin society. And anything that does that in the name of art is not art.
All right. That's good. I didn't. So you were commissioner of
Culture and history for the state of West Virginia.
So then you are definitely, you at least have been at some point in time considered qualified to judge what is art.
There's a lot of artists in West Virginia who beg to differ. And they'd be right on that. I found myself mostly as the administrator of, it was the arts, historic preservation, history, archives, museums, and so forth. And they had a giant culture center, at the state capitol, which I have to brag on West Virginia. They created that space to house the state theater, the state museum, the state archives, and state arts councils and all that. And it was a space for their creative class in the state of West Virginia. And bravo to them for creating that space. And we managed all those federal and state programs from that building. And their focus was strictly and solely on West Virginia culture and West Virginia art. More power to them. I agree with it completely. It's their tax dollars. And so we focused solely on West Virginia artists.
Okay. I have another quote for you because I gather those. I'm not going to use that one just yet. Because this one talks about experiences. So Monica Guzman had this book that I read of hers that was really good, all about just having conversations with people you disagree with, and how do you continue to engage in meaningful relationship and conversation, even if you don't agree. And she said, our assumptions are only as good as our experiences. Fail to notice your assumptions, and they might harden into lies. Turn them into questions, and they'll get you closer to truth. So like you called me out earlier, like, hey, you assume they know who Laura is. Like, and that's something about you that I've noticed that you're big on trying to find the questions. Like, so do you think it would be fair to call you a good questioner?
Okay.
Yeah.
If that gets you through the day. I am very stoic. I'm very introverted. I don't think I used to be when I was younger. When I moved to Hopkinsville, there's a lady here that used to help lead the leadership program. And I was talking to her about that. And she said, as you get older, that changes. And also your positions, your work can change you. I am very stoic and introverted. I do believe, to follow up on that quote, there are two things. You've got to listen. And you've got to leave emotion at the door. I despise emotion. I despise emotion. There's no place for it, particularly when you're talking about serious topics. Good emotion or bad emotion, whatever your emotion is, I have no space for it. Let's come in, let's look at the facts, let's listen to everybody and assume you don't have all the answers. Never walk through any door thinking I know everything. That's just not feasibly possible.
Yeah.
And really, I have no time for that. And we're in a era across this nation, maybe across this world, where people are so dogmatic. And I think maybe the internet's doing that to people. I'm right. What I believe is right. And you're either on my team or you're not.
Yeah.
And I don't accept that.
So you are definitely, and I'll agree with that, because I know you call yourself stoic, and you talk about like stoic philosophy. So I think, all right, that's another one. I think you're the only stoic that I know, a real stoic. Like I know plenty of people who might say, yes, but like the way you described yourself just now, of actually saying, no, emotions, you're not involved here. There's not anybody else I can think of who actually I can say I've seen them successfully, routinely live that out.
It isn't successful in America. I mean, most people want their politicians to have a fire and a passion and an emotion. Most people want their preachers in church to be highly emotional. I grew up in a Southern Baptist black church, and I can remember the pastor that baptized me, Reverend Ragland, loved that man, and he was very educated, and he was a little stoic himself, and I thought the world of him. Then after he left the church and moved away, they had a series of pastors, and I remember one, I don't know where that guy was from, maybe Tennessee or somewhere, and he was tall, and he looked like Frederick Douglass with his hair and all that. And I remember, he was screaming and yelling, and there was a platform. He sort of jumped off of it in the church, and I thought, good Lord. And he was coming down the aisle, and you got some people up and screaming, and I just thought, that ain't gonna work for me. And I miss my pastor, and that's the guy that baptized me, and I don't need all the. And later I would discuss with folks as I got older, there's a difference between teaching and preaching to some people, and I was wanting the teacher.
Yeah.
And I didn't need all the emotions, but in a country like this, a lot of people want that.
Yeah.
They think your passion ensures your authenticity and credibility. I don't. I if you're running for office to me and you want my support, let's just talk it out. You don't have to give me the buzzword. I'm going to go to Washington and fight for you. Well, I don't want you fighting. Who are you fighting? We're one country. Who you got to fight? We're not at war with it. I said it's not a civil war. I want you to go up there and go to the committee meetings you're assigned to.
Yeah.
I want you to read the legislation that comes across your desk. And I want you to think about your constituency back here in Kentucky or whatever state you represent, and go, how do the people I represent want to live their lives? And does this legislation, does this budget fit who we are?
Yeah.
That's it. I don't want you fighting. I don't need all that.
Yeah.
Just go up there and do the job we sent you to do. And that's enough for me. I don't need to know what your dog's name is. And but that's me. Other people, they have a right of wanting what they want. And maybe that works for some people. I have a friend in West Virginia. Her name's Pam, and Pam probably would vote for you because you have a dog. She loves dogs more than she loves people. She thinks animals are the greatest thing ever on earth, and that's fantastic. And she probably would. So, we're all different.
All right. Well, I'm going to stop this episode right here, Troy, and we're going to pause, take a quick break, and we're going to record the second episode of yours. You said I have till 11. I got time.
Okay.
The views, thoughts, and opinions expressed in this podcast are the speaker's own and do not represent the views, thoughts, and opinions of any institution, organization, or corporation. The material and information presented here is for general information purposes only. All persons who participated did so of their own free will and speak for themselves only, regardless of any personal affiliations they may possess. This podcast has been a production of Salt.Light.Love Ministries. All rights reserved.